to talk about the different features of functions from graphs and from tables. So to get started, let's talk about how we discuss those features. When I am going to start discussing what parts of a graph are increasing or decreasing, I am going to refer to the interval that they increase or decrease. Now, what are we talking about? If I look at this number line, I can see that the interval that is shaded on this number line is from -4 to 2. Now in math, I do not use this notation. I use mathematical notation, and I would write something like the values that are shaded have to be greater than or equal to -4 and less than or equal to 2. These two notations mean the same thing, that I am discussing the values between -4 and 2. X is between or equal to -4 and 2. Now let's discuss a function. If I'm looking at a graph, I read it left to right, so the direction that my arrow is going. So as I'm trying to decide if something is staying constant, decreasing, or increasing, I am going to look left to right. So I notice that the first portion of my graph is flat. That means from here, and we're going to draw in our boundary lines, just like I would think of domain and range, my graph is constant from this boundary line, which is at -5. Notice that's where it crosses the x-axis, and between -2. My graph is decreasing between these two boundary lines. Between -2 and 1, it is decreasing. And finally, my graph is increasing or going up between 1, this boundary line, and this boundary line. So let's fill in what those intervals would look like. Well, same graph. What portions are increasing? Remember my boundaries for increasing? It starts increasing here and it stops increasing here. Well, what are those two numbers? It increases from 1 to 5, and again I'm looking at my x-axis for those two boundary points. If it's between 1 and 5, I write x because I'm looking at the x-axis, and it's from 1 to 5. Decreasing, I draw on my boundary lines from this point on the left, so between -2, and I already have the other boundary drawn in, and 1. So x, or my graph, is decreasing between -2 and 1. And where's my graph staying constant? We decided between -5 and 2. So I would write between -5 and 2. -2, pardon me. And that is how I write the intervals for when a graph is increasing, decreasing, or staying constant. Now let's discuss intercepts. Remember, an x-intercept is where my graph or my picture crosses the x-axis. So if this is my x-axis, my picture crosses at this point right here, which is 3. So my x-intercept is 3. If I wrote that as an ordered pair, that would be 3, 0. My y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. So at this point right here, which is at -3, if I wrote that as a ordered pair, that would be 0, -3. So let's go ahead and draw a function with the following characteristics. If a graph is increasing from -3 to 0 on the x-axis, I'm going to start by drawing in my boundary. So -3 to 0. Eventually you're going to draw these without having to make these boundary lines. We'll just know between what two lines we're looking at. And I want to increase. So I'm going to make a dot anywhere on the -3 line. So I can make a dot here, or I can make a dot up here. And I'm going to choose this bottom point down here, and I'm going to make a dot that's higher because I want my graph to increase than my point on my other line. So notice if I connect these two dots, my graph is increasing. I do want to point out that from here to here would also be considered increasing. It just wouldn't be quite as steep. I can write either for this graph. It's your choice. for these problems, your answers may vary from mine. So let's go ahead and continue. From 0 to 2, so let's draw in our boundary lines. Here's our 0 boundary, here's our 2 boundary. Okay, our graph is decreasing. So I'm going to just make sure my line is going down between these two lines. And my last boundary is from 2 to 5. So I'm going to draw my line here. That is flat. Next, okay, well, how do I determine if something is increasing or decreasing or constant on a table? Well, let's discuss. Remember that a table just gives ordered pairs, and I could plot those if I wanted to. So 0, 1 would be right here on my graph, 2, 3 would be here, 4, 5 would be here. Now I can see if I plotted the points that my graph is increasing, but there should be a faster way, and there is a faster way of determining if a table is increasing. Okay, notice the reason my graph went up is because my y values went up. So as I am determining if my graph is increasing or decreasing, okay, this is what I'm going to look at. So I'm going to look here for the change. So what change do I have? Between 1, okay, I'm going up to 3, and then I'm going up to 5, and notice if I go past this 5, it's still 5, so the increase has stopped. And my notation, just to mark it up and make sure I know what's going on, is to write a plus sign for increasing. I'm going to leave where I left off, so I got to 5 and I was increasing. Well, then what happened after I got to 5? Well, I'm going back to 5, and I notice it's still 5, so it's staying constant. So that's what happens next. It stays constant. I'm going to put an equal sign for if it stays the same and constant. Now after that, okay, I'm starting back at 5. What happened? Well, I went from 5 to 3 to 1 to 0. So each of those is a decrease. So I'm going to write decrease. Now, in order to write the interval where the function is doing this change, either increasing, staying the same, or negative, or a decrease, I'm going to still write my interval in terms of x, meaning x is still going in the center of my interval, which means I can't use the numbers from the y column. I need to use the numbers from the x column. So I notice that 1, 3, 5, that's an increase. So it starts increasing at 1, so what is the x value at 1? Well, the x value at 1 is 0. So it starts increasing at 0. Well, and where did my increase stop? It stopped at 5. Okay. Well, what is the matching corresponding x value for that value? 4. So my graph is increasing, okay, from 0 to 4. Now I'm going to continue. If I go down my table, I notice that next I wrote that my interval stayed the same. Okay, 5, 5. So if I look at where did it start staying the same, it started staying the same at 4, and it stopped staying the same. Okay, we're still the same at 6, but past 6, okay, not the same. So my interval for constant is from 4 to 6. And finally, my interval for decreasing, we start here, it goes 5, 3, 1, 0. So what's the corresponding of where it starts decreasing? It starts decreasing at 6, and it stops decreasing at 12. So from 6 to 12, it is decreasing. All right, let's discuss, well, what are the intercepts? I'm going to change colors for a second. My intercepts, remember, are where they cross my x and my y axis. Because I don't have a graph, I can't see that visually. So what you have to remember is that when I have an x-intercept, the y value or the height must be 0. When I have a y-intercept, the x value, or going side to side, okay, we can't go side to side at all, it must be 0. So what are my values for my x-intercept? Well, my y is 0 down here, and what's my x value? 12. So my y-intercept is 12, and my x-intercept is up here where my y-intercept is up here where my x is equal to 0, and that is at 1. Take a second and pause and try this last one on your own, and then play to check. All right, so let's go ahead. Remember, I'm looking at my Y column to start looking for my changes. So 30, 10, 0, 15. So it stops decreasing at 0. So my decrease. Remember to go back to 0. Okay, that's where the change stopped, and that's where I need to look to see what happens next. 0 to 15 is an increase. Okay, 15. Okay, it stays the same. It doesn't stay the same past the second 15. So I'm gonna write equals. Go back to that 15. Okay, and if I look down the rest of the table, it's all increasing. So what do my intervals look like? Well, I have two places where they are increasing. Here and here. I'm going to write both of those intervals down. Remember to look at the opposite side of the table. It's increasing here from 10 to 15. So X is in the center from 10 to 15. And from starting at 25 and going through 30. Sorry, not 25. Starting at 20 and going to 30. Decreasing. Well, the only place that decreased was this section right here. So what X values was that? 0 to 10. So 0 to 10. And where was it constant? Right here, which was 15 to 20. What are my X and my Y-intercept? Well, remember, X-intercept, I'm looking for the Y value to be 0. So here is my X-intercept, 10, and here is my Y-intercept, 30. All right, thanks for taking your time to listen. If you have any questions, please reach out to your teacher.